Jai Hind, Jai Bharat, and welcome to Dev Talks. This is Adi Achint. For the second time on my show, Mr. Saurav Jha, a renowned economist and someone with a very, very hard opinion about various geopolitical events that are happening around. Of course, we've spoken about the world economy one time before, and I've been trying to get him online for a discussion on what's going to happen in this uncertain economic future going forward. Chinese are slowing down, Americans are facing challenges. Well, what can even one say about Europe? If there is a little bit of a light at the end of the tunnel, I think it's coming from Bharat and nowhere else. So let's understand a little more. And he's also got a book that he would like to recommend that I've just actually placed an order. So I'm going to read it, recommend you do as well. He's got some very clear views. Let's dig in and find out what's happening with the world economy, beginning with China. Sir, good evening. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Adi. Thank you for having me here.
So let's see
I'm
your
glad
book,
to
sir,
be
before
back.
we dive into the subject.
Yeah, it's very kind of you. This is the second edition of my book, Negotiating the New Normal. It's now out in paperback. It's just hitting the stores right now, and of course it'll be available on various web platforms. And it is essentially a book about the world economy and India's place in it, the contemporary world economy. So yeah, as you can see, the subtitle is How India Must Grow in a Pandemic Ridden World, Negotiating the New Normal, How India Must Grow in a Pandemic Ridden World. So it basically goes through the entire world economy, basically goes through the major world economic centers before coming to where India is placed and what India must do. So, and
Hmm.
many of the things that we are talking about now, such as deflation in China, or the inflationary pressure on the West, the fact that there is this technological decoupling that is underway between the USA and China, the state of Europe, as you pointed out, all of that has actually been extensively covered in this book already. It sort of gives you the origin story of where all of this lies, and it comes up to our time to explain why things are happening the way they are happening, all the way from quantitative easing to what people sometimes just call printing money, etc., although it's much more complicated than that. So all the way to the way the United States started working against Huawei and the entire Huawei story. That's chapter 7 actually. The rise and fall of the Chinese economy is also detailed in this. And anybody who reads those chapters, or at least has the patience to read them, will understand why China is where it is right now. So it's the story of the world economy from the sort of the from the global financial crisis to the corona pandemic crisis, with some origin story time lapse, origin story flashbacks as well, because we go into the history of the Japanese economy, because that is central to understanding the various other East Asian industrializers.
Yeah.
So all that is there, and then we come to the issue of India, where it is placed, how it is placed, and what it must do. The efficacy of the PLI schemes, all that is examined. That's all in the last chapter. Anyway, so I'm sure at least some will find value in this book.
I'm
And
sure, sir. I will link the book at in the description so that people find it easy to kind of just click and order it if they feel like it. Since you mentioned China, sir, let's begin there. That's a good place to start, and my favorite subject, as a matter of fact. I love the Chinese. So I want to know, sir, see what's happening within China as a layman. I'm not an economist. I'm not a specialist of any sort. What I can see is a big speed breaker in the road, uh, and the Chinese seem not able to even reach the peak. And this is a huge speed breaker in the middle of the Chinese pathway. We see terrible, economic ramifications of the COVID lockdown. We are seeing unemployment where official figures 23%, unofficial people are saying 46%. We are seeing the industry slowing down. And today I was actually reading the ZTE, one of the biggest ZG, ZTG, or one of the biggest asset management companies is also going tail up. So what's happening inside China and why is it in such a precarious condition as far as the economics is concerned?
Right. Thank you, Adi, for that question. So you mentioned the unemployment rate. That is actually the youth unemployment rate that you're talking about,
Yes.
which now is being projected by some economists to be actually as high as between 45 and 46%. So that
Wow.
is the youth unemployment rate, and that is higher than what the United States has as far as youth unemployment rate is concerned, and higher than what India has also as far as the youth unemployment rate is concerned. The youth unemployment rate became a major concern when Europe went into the Great Recession, when the
Hmm.
European sovereign debt crisis happened. So when we typically talk about youth unemployment, we think of countries like Spain, Portugal, etc. But now now China is quite clearly beating even those countries, because in most of those European countries, it's hovered at around the 30% mark for a while now.
Yeah.
Maybe
Yeah.
that's gone up with the pandemic, but China at 45.3 is actually something that was their best kept secret for a while, because in the wake of the pandemic in 2021, at that time itself they started talking about a new category of employment as part of their national income statistics, called
Ah.
flexible employment, right? And suddenly 200 million people in China were deemed to be flexibly employed. So see, the pandemic has merely made the delicate dance that China has been on for most of the last decade as well, right? To made it an even more delicate dance. And now what we are seeing is, see, it's like this. What is the path China chose? China chose a path of high investment expenditure coupled with exports, right? So it was an
Right.
investment driven, export led model, basically. In India also, when we talk about manufacturing investment has been found to be highly correlated with export success. We basically mean that when foreign markets are sort of, we tend to see greater manufacturing investment in India also when foreign markets can be tapped more easily. So in the
Right.
case of China, the whole post, the whole the sort of the big condominium between the USA and China took place in 1979, when China was extended MFN status, right, by the United States of America. And exceptions were given to the Smoot-Hawley Act and all that for China. So, and you will see that in the decade of the 80s, trade between the USA and China zoomed by several multiples. And there was that boom in China, and that was Deng Xiaoping's era, and he decided that some provinces would get rich before others, right? Of course, he made that speech later in '93 when he was no longer president. But he, in the '80s, he made those special economic zones. Guangzhou, etc., came up at that time, right? And a lot of the investment came in from the East Asian countries, which had already industrialized, and East Asian Chinese based in Singapore, Malaysia, etc. Of course, Taiwan was a big investor, Japan was a huge investor, and then as Korea became more and more industrialized and had to export capital, it became a big investor as well. Then, so there was the instability of Tiananmen, which was sparked by inflation and lack of democracy, etc. And because there was the Chinese economy ran into inflationary pressure. Now it is in deflation, but it ran into inflationary pressure in the late 80s with the first boom. And that was a huge reason behind the farmers joining the students, in protests against the CPC regime. But we all know where that went. And
Hmm.
instead of China being a pariah for too long, by 93, Bill Clinton basically created the second wave of interlocking the US and Chinese, the second initiative in terms of pushing the US and Chinese economies together. That was 1993. And NAFTA was coming into being, so people were worried about Mexico, but a lot was
Yeah.
being done with basically China as well. And that is when the second wave started. And then the third wave was the accession of China to the WTO, 2001,
WTO.
right?
Hmm.
These three decades, essentially the 80s and 90s and the 2010s, saw the United States becoming heavily dependent on China for goods. So the Chinese people worked and worked, essentially. I mean, there's that old saying, right? In the 90s, the Chinese people produced 16 million shoes, 16 million pairs of shoes to buy
Wow.
one Airbus. Right? That was the terms of trade that was going on. So China became actually a major deflationary force for the West, and that deflationary force gave, because there was this what period, because of China's tremendous scale building, you saw this period in the United States called the Great Moderation, which began in the 2000s after the dot-com burst and all that.
Correct.
So so while growth remained steady, prices remained also at a low ebb. And this gave central banks in the West, especially the Federal Reserves and others, the notion that, everything was hunky dory and they did not need to raise interest rates or anything. And that fed equity bubbles because, you see, the US economy kept on becoming more and more financialized. If you are going to
Yeah.
offshore everything, and outsourcing had also kicked in with India joining the services party, as it were. Obviously the turn was to the fire sectors, real estate, insurance, and
BPOs,
finance,
this and that.
insurance, and
Yeah.
real
Yeah.
estate. So
Mm,
the
mm.
fire economy was fired up in America, and of course we know how that went. Ultimately it led to the GFC, with the crisis emerging in the subprime market. But actually total leverage was out of whack in the United States. So anyway, so what happened at that point was the Chinese economy had taken a two-pronged path. On the one hand, it was building manufacturing scale using the export markets it had gained, and now it was gaining other markets as well, because it had brought down prices to such an extent of various goods that even it could tap the so-called third world markets as well now. So China had emerged as a major trading giant on the world stage, led by its manufacturing exports. High, but it was still very much dependent on the West for markets, even though it had tapped other markets as well, because those were the higher value markets, as it were. At the same time, even that huge manufacturing rise was not enough for to deliver the growth rates that they had started clocking. They'd clocked 14% real GDP growth rates as well
Mm,
on
mm.
some occasions. That was intensely fueled by a simultaneous major real estate boom. So between,
Purchase
you'll
home,
find
please. Mm.
huge boom. I'll tell you the figures. Between 1998 and 2013, the Chinese economy would see the share of real estate in GDP climb from 4% to 12.5%. And today, it
Wow.
is close to 30% if you take all the
Yeah.
ancillary industries together. We'll come to
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
issue.
Mm.
So those massive growth rates were being driven by the twin engines of industrialization and urbanization in China. Okay, because you'll find a lot of IMF and World Bank papers which talk about how urbanization must accompany industrialization for industrialization to be effective. This is a debatable issue, and we can have another program where we discuss especially this matter, because it's of great relevance to us as well, whether industrialization and urbanization need to go hand in hand
Hand in
for
hand.
the true benefits of industrialization to be reaped. Anyway, but the problem was they did not go fully hand in hand also in the case of China, because China, to make those nice glittering cities, had adopted the huku system. So a lot of people who used to come from the countryside to work in those flashy cities could not actually buy property over there. Okay, they did not have urban huku. Many did not have what is called urban huku. This is in contrast to Japan, by the way. They used to allow Japanese farmers to sell their land wherever they wanted and
Yeah.
buy wherever they wanted,
Come.
which is why
Correct.
which is why Japan's economy could rebalance much more easily also, and China's economy has not rebalanced. So when you have this intense investment and export led model, and then you suddenly see a huge fall in your exports, which is what started happening in the wake of the global financial crisis in the first 2 years of the Great Recession. China, all alarm bells were ringing in the Chinese economy, because consumption, their own domestic consumption, because they had underpaid labor for years, they had not paid labor according to its productivity. How would you
Correct.
have got the devastating China price if people had been paid fairly? Okay. They imported the latest machines, so their enterprises were highly productive, the manufacturing enterprises, but they didn't pay their labor anywhere near their productivity. That produced that deadly combination, right, which gave the China price to dominate world markets. But
And
then,
lower internal consumption.
exactly, because if the share of labor keeps going down, then you can imagine what is going to happen. The share of labor plateaued and then went down in China.
Correct. Hmm. Hmm.
So,
Hmm.
so that, and a lot of people did not have urban huku. So they did not buy anything in these glittery, flashy cities anywhere. So that was not really something that they could depend on. They had to buy property in outer lying areas, right? So that also has an impact on their consumption behavior. So whatever money they had a tendency to oversave. This was there in Japan also. Japan had a whole
Correct.
system which used to promote oversaving actually. So China also had that system, no social security net. You're not allowing the workers to buy where where they of course workers could not buy on the Shenzhen skyline, but they could have but at one point they could have bought in places which would have been more
Somewhere.
suitable for them,
Hmm. Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
So there is your thing, underpaid workers, investment driven model linked to exports. Suddenly the export prong goes under because of the global financial crisis and the great recession in its wake. China has to do something to save its economy because demand is collapsing, right? And it has overcapacity industries everywhere, that humongous scale that they built up, and that scale just kept getting bigger. I'll give you an example. China even today can produce more than 1 billion tons of steel, right? They are the top producer by a very very long distance. The second largest producer, India, produces between 120 and 140. Japan comes in third. So you can imagine, right, the kind of overcapacity that they have, which is
My
why the
God.
BRI was also set up. One of the reasons why
Set up.
BRI was set up, and
Hmm.
I go into the different reasons in my book, Negotiating the New Normal, is of course exporting overcapacity, right? While trying to, it was like a win-win Christmas tree. I'm going to solve all kinds of my problems, but it didn't turn out to be the case. So then they just gave the directive that let us kick the can down the road. Let us begin a mega government investment program to save the economy. But they were very clever. Here, the Communist Party played its. Look at the internal politics of China, which I'll talk about a little more. What it did was, instead of the central government giving a transparent, large fiscal stimulus, a very large fiscal push was instead given through local governments. Okay, so it
Hidden
was
debt.
given through state governments, it was provincial governments, counties, and municipalities. And look at the way it was given. Even there, it was not given in a transparent manner. Local governments were told to make these off the books entities, or float these corporate entities which are called local government financial vehicles, right? For which the seed capital would be given in the form of very long term loans by Chinese state institutional lenders like the China Development Bank. And
Okay.
based on those loans, they based on those which were based on their equity, that is their paid up capital sort of, they would then leverage that these LGVs through commercial bank loans to develop all kinds of infrastructure, right? Now the problem was that China has always had a very lopsided federal model.
Hmm.
80% of the expenditure that local governments are supposed to undertake, okay, does not cannot actually does is not supported by the center
Yep.
at all. Only 20% of it is supported by their by their tax receipts, because the central government takes an overwhelming share of tax receipts in China. Get the picture? So the central government basically keeps local governments weak in China.
He needs to raise his own money then, at
Exactly.
the local
So
level.
yeah, so at the local level, they need so, and they could not do that for years. But now Beijing
Hmm.
was giving them a way, and so they had these repressed tendencies in them, because see, they also wanted to grow their fiefdoms. They
Correct.
unfortunately saw this as a golden opportunity to break the shackles of the past, because most of that collected revenue used to be, not most, 50% actually used to be taken by the center, right? And they had to find other means, they had to find their own means to finance 80% of the expenditures. They saw this as a great, mouse end. I won't say godsend for them, but a mouse end. So this
Same
was a great
difference.
mouse end for them, in the sense that they thought, yes, this is the time when we can build the stuff we want to. Unfortunately, these LGFVs could only use land, right? Or the stuff they built on that land as collateral
Yeah.
for more loans. They had nothing else. The land that local governments had, basically, those were transferred to these LGFVs, these local government financial vehicles. And
Hmm.
then the spree began. And you will see many
It,
great YouTube videos about that spree, both negative
fast
and positive.
construction. Hmm.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So what
Hmm.
happened was, provincial government started building bridges across rivers to nowhere. Municipalities started building huge stadiums and other things, and ghost towns. And even small principalities started building, counties started building airports. So you have ghost airports also in China, in all parts of
Wow.
China, which
Wow.
are not really serviced. So this is what they said. So this goes to an old Chinese proverb. It's called eating dinner at lunch. Get the picture? Ah,
Yeah.
so
I've
that
heard
is
of
what
this.
so that is what started over here. Now this is the unbalanced path, which was, by the way, that path was already unbalanced. The first time they said that we need to rebalance our economy to domestic consumption and not depend on, an investment driven export led model, was actually way back in December 2024 in the China Economic Work Conference. That is when they first
Okay.
said this. And even today, you are hearing this from them, isn't it? That we need
Yeah.
a more balanced economy.
Balanced
So
approach. Yeah.
20 years have gone by. They have still not rebalanced their economy. In 2007, during the 2007 NPC, Wen Jiabao said this, that their growth was unstable, unbalanced, uncoordinated, and unsustainable. And this thing has been echoed by Xi Jinping also on more than one occasion in the last 15 years, right?
Fantastic.
So they are still there. Now you understand. So they were already down a path. They were already down bubbleonomics, right? It's not like it's anything new over here. People think that America is down that path. These guys have been down that real estate boom path a long time ago. Only problem is, you see, when you don't have your own reserve currency, you cannot produce the financial economies of scale to grow finance and insurance also simultaneously in the way that you want.
Hmm.
See, America has been using global scale there. The cost for these countries, companies, American companies, because of the dollar, is actually much lower in some ways,
Much lesser. Correct.
because they can mitigate all kinds of risks by simply using the dollar, right? They don't have to essentially keep aside funds for managing certain kinds of risks. Whereas for any other insurance company looking to operate anywhere else from some other country, currency risk has to be factored in much more. You know, United States
Well,
has United States has several advantages. Anyway, one of the reasons why they wanted to internationalize their currency. So they have not been able to move out of this unsustained, unbalanced economy. They became even more unbalanced after the 2007 global financial crisis, because they had to
ji.
save their economy. Until 2013, commercial bank credit grew at a frenetic pace in China, pushing more and more stuff into the real estate sector. Then they started sounding the alarm that, we are just building assets. The whole talk is, yeah, it's debt, but it's backed by assets. But what is the actual value of these assets? They're not usable, most of these assets. You can't
Correct.
just
Nobody's.
keep creating concrete palaces and say that we have assets backing this or that. This is a typical fallacy with this path, actually. So there you have it. And there you then you came to that, and then they sounded. Then suddenly what they did was they started tapering off commercial bank credit to these local government financial vehicles that had saved the economy. By that time, they were already accounting for about 50% of domestic debt, Chinese domestic debt.
Yikes.
Then the whole stuff began. Then there were state directives, don't lend to them. Then they reversed that, because every time they try to come out of it, growth just starts tapering off, because they are
Hmm.
so over invested in various other sectors where productivity has basically stalled that they can't deliver growth otherwise. And growth can't be delivered through consumption anyway, because their economy is disbalanced. Consumption is less than 40% of GDP from the
Correct.
expenditure side, that is. So what do? They then the Goldilocks dance started in China. How to keep things from tipping over. But
Ah,
look at the
okay.
funny part. In China, what happened was commercial bank direct lending to the LGFs tapered off, but shadow banking started in a big way. Shadow bank lending. So
This is
these
what I want to ask
LGFs
you actually.
so the LGFs started getting a huge amount of money from wealth management products, etc. Now it turns out those wealth management products are simply the rebadged bad loans of the
Same.
LGFs only by the commercial banks. These commercial banks are the ones behind shadow banking in China, public sector commercial banks. So you get the picture. So now you have interlocking strands of liabilities which are actually, which are not
Exploded.
backed. Exactly, which are not. This is a different kind of over leveraging from, say, that happens in the case of derivatives, in the case of derivatives markets. This is, I mean, the fact of the matter is simple. You're taking one bad loan, repackaging it, selling it to somebody. You're essentially
Correct.
refinancing bad loans continuously through various means. And with each sort of turnover of refinancing you're doing, it's becoming murkier as to who is basically behind, how many people have exposure to that bad debt. You get the picture. And on top of this, from 2014-15, the central government started saying that these LGFEs don't really have, most of them don't really have central government backing. Then the panic started setting in, that if the government is not going to stand guarantee behind all this LGFE credit fuel spending debt, then it's just private debt basically. And it's very bad private debt.
Wow.
So and right now it is at least 60 to 65%, by the way, just LGFV. When we talk about we talk about America's debt and all that. China's debt position is worse because its overall debt to GDP ratio is comfortably around the 300% mark, right?
300%.
100%. I'm not talking about their public debt. I'm talking about public and private debt and LGFE debt, all of it thrown into the mix. Their corporate debt to GDP ratio has been comfortably over 165%, despite all the deleveraging campaigns. And this kind of extend and pretend, obviously, LGFEs was one prong. Another prong in which they started to fuel expansion was through their own public sector enterprises. And that also, instead of investing in telecommunications and all, despite all the 5G jazz that you hear, they also increase their exposure to real estate. Get the picture? And the only small and medium enterprises that could get commercial bank loans were also linked to real estate. Today, 50% of all debt in China, one way or the other, is exposed to the real estate market, more than 50%.
That is insanity.
And 70% of wealth is parked in the real estate sector. In a country whose demographics are adverse, which has not rebalanced, where people are saving and most of their savings are in the real estate sector. Why do you think China can export so much? You see, in the current account balance, if a country is exporting, it means that it is a net saver. Okay, government, public and private sectors put together, it is a net saver. Unless you are,
Hmm.
in accounting terms. Unless you are a net saver, you can't export. But it could be that you may not be able to export, and all the net saving that you do only ends up as delta INV inventories. That could also happen. It's not automatic. It's just the way when you look at the two equations in the national income accounting identity. Net savings means net exports. Okay, I'll give you a simple matter. There is this, the national income accounting reduces to this. It is on the expenditure side. Okay, you look at G minus T, which is government expenditure minus government revenue or taxes basically, plus I minus S, which is investment, private investment minus private savings, plus X minus M, okay, which is exports minus imports, is equal to 0. This is a national income accounting identity. Now, if G minus T is positive, which is almost always the case, because government expenditure in all the modern monetary production economies is usually in deficit. Okay, G minus T means a deficit, government expenditure more than government revenues. And I minus S, let us keep I minus S is also positive. Okay, if I minus S is also positive, then X minus M will have to be negative for this identity to be 0. Get the picture? The first two is just simple math, simple addition. If the first two terms are negative, if the first two terms are positive, sorry, if the first two terms are positive, then the third term will have to be negative for this identity to hold.
To
In the
balance
case,
out, huh?
yeah, in the case of India, this is what you obtain basically. Okay, we are a net importer. The exports minus imports are, are negative. But in the
That's a
case
better
of
place to be, sir.
China, But in the case of China, that even though that G minus S is positive, right, that I minus M is also that I minus S is terribly negative sometimes. Not terribly, but it's negative enough to overwhelm that G minus T. So when that
That's
becomes negative, then that X minus M has to be positive for this identity to hold. Get the picture? So you
so
have to
there
have net domestic savings for you to be a net exporter.
there's just no way out.
But you see, but what you try to do is you try to fiddle around with all this. Okay.
Yeah, you leverage it from one place to the other and
Yeah,
transfer the debt here and there in the other.
you try to move this here. You try to draw down investment. You try and you try to draw down savings by boosting consumption. Right. That consumption boost leads to that M getting boosted also. That import part. That's how you try to play around with all this.
So,
Of
but
course,
this
the people in there would be a whole party in the West. We would say, if you want to be a net exporter, make G minus S negative as soon as you can. But basically, run a surplus budget. Run a surplus budget. So even if I minus S is slightly, sort of what do you call that? Even if I minus S
also
is slightly positive, right? It won't matter. X minus M would be there.
interesting, sir,
Uh,
because just a short question on this beautiful story that you've told us where the Chinese dug a hole for themselves, if I may. Didn't they realize they were doing this?
yeah, they did. I told you now, since 2004, they have been saying we need to rebalance our economy, but they
What
just
have they
haven't been
done?
able to ever do it. Just because the global financial crisis put them on such a path to save their economy, that path now they have historical path determinancy.
So, I learned my biggest lesson: when the Chinese say we are doing something, that means they're doing nothing. So, but
Ah,
when when you take this, right, this sort of a ticking time bomb, if I may, it just can splat anytime. I'm sure that these guys are working hard to keep it together as far as they can. But the overages in terms of their demands for expenditure, for example, for defense, is going to drag them even further down.
Yeah, so you're seeing the Sovietization, re-Sovietization of the Chinese state in some ways, na? In all of this, what they have done in the recent, people are talking about selective defaults. What are those selective defaults? Those are defaults with people's money, private money, and the banks which are going down. By the way, the banks that started going down in the recent past, on paper they had a very healthy position in terms of capital adequacy and non-performance loans, which, and even their profitability as per their last reported figures, last reported results, was good. So what does that mean about statistics in China? It basically means that what people like Charlene Shu and have said, that the non-performing asset ratio in China is much higher in their banking systems. It's over 20% probably. And when you have that, then you go towards the lost decades, because all that people do is extend and pretend. They don't then extend new loans anymore, to keep the, and in any case, given the sectors that China has over invested in, the credit multiplier is in those sectors is zero. If you take those sectors, what is the point of pushing in more credit just like that? So it's just basically debt turnover that is going on, and the People's Bank of China is playing its part through monetary easing, through RRR cuts, through other forms of easing also. People say printing money in America. America's printing money, which is by basically large scale asset purchases, is much more transparent than what is going on in China.
Oh yeah,
Now, somebody
yeah,
may say
absolutely.
that they have this entire economy is a controlled economy, everything will be managed. No, it is not. It is not. There are too many hidden linkages. That is exactly where they're trying to go. Right now, their only game is to make it a more and more controlled economy, to have private sector firms go under and be absorbed by larger public sector firms. See, what they're doing is these commercial banks in China, which are publicly controlled, government controlled, they are extending loans for the takeover of private competitors in various
Yeah,
sectors by public sector
yeah.
enterprises. So this is their thinking. The regulatory thinking is, the more I increase the share of the government, the more I'll be able to macro manage all this. And they are going back and forth, by the way. In the last 7 years, somebody on social media was telling me they have been reducing credit. No, they have had no option. They have gone back and forth on it. Sometimes they are reducing credit, and the moment that growth target is slipping, they're again trying to pump credit into certain sectors. Like even this year, there might be a 13% expansion in commercial bank credit, for God knows, but it will not deliver growth.
13%.
Even, yeah, and they, by the way, they follow a calendar year system, not a
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
March.
yeah. Yeah, yeah. March to April.
Their
Yeah,
financial year is basically the calendar year.
yeah.
What kind of a setup do you have over there now? You have a setup where there is the China Banking and Regulatory Commission, the China Security and Regulatory Commission, all trying their best to micromanage things from going under, and the PBOC playing the main goalkeeper's role. But it's not so simple. Even the PBOC chief had said in 2017 that China might see a Minsky moment. Minsky moment is a sudden and abrupt fall in asset prices. Okay, that's what Minsky moment.
What happens then, sir?
What happens then is, then the all the hidden bad debt will become overt, and then the lost decades will begin, because credit will get jammed in the economy completely. And so
So
even whatever notion of growth they have will not happen, like Japan. Like, see,
it'll
they
occur.
have learned from Japan. Japan deflated its own bubble very quickly, and that led to Endaka Fukyo, what is called, the Heisei boom. First, you had the Endaka Fukyo was the high-end recession, which
High
began
end.
after the Plaza Accord, and then you had the Heisei boom completely get deflated, and the Bank of Japan did it deliberately, because they think it was a dangerous bubble. But the Chinese are so afraid, the PBOC, having learned from Japan, they don't want to do that. They still want to see if they can tinker. And their media machine and people who might be invested there are going around, saying, oh, it's a delicate dance, but, it can somehow be managed. Let's see how much it can be managed. That slow motion decline is very much underway. Nobody can deny that now. Imagine a country where 30% of the GDP is one way or the other linked to the real
Yeah.
estate sector, is a country where people have been underpaid for decades, who have still taken their hard-earned money and parked it in that sector and are
Same
not
sector.
having children, how are they going to turn over the debt now? And who's going to buy those new places? Where is the demand going to come from? Property prices are hugely overvalued in China even now. So you're going to see a major correction. It's inevitable. And the government can't keep pump priming, right? All the time via different means. So one thing that is going to happen is the central government in China will also have to overtly step in to recapitalize banks, etc. So then this 50% notional, public debt to GDP ratio that they are showing for the central government will go up in smoke. They'll end up with something close to 100%. So this notion that only America is 120, 105, 110% or whatever is will also become will also be, see, it's like this: when the private sector has to deleverage, the public sector has to step in.
Yeah.
Okay, here the public sector is not stepping in a transparent manner. It is playing all kinds of tricks. The internal
Tricks at the
politics
back
of
end.
China is playing out. It destroyed the tech barons, right? Xi Jinping destroyed the tech barons. I told you how they control these provinces. Guizhou province is basically begging Beijing for money. It is going under. An entire Chinese province is going under. And it was one of the uh, big A's of the red stimulus that began in 2007. So you have all of them in a bit of a bind. And look at what are the other things they're doing. They're making sure that the private sector recedes from parts of the economy.
Yeah.
You have a winner take model emerging in various sectors. Huawei is basically eating up its competitors, Chinese competitors in the Chinese market, because it is not being able to grow that quickly elsewhere anymore as it had thought it would because of the war against Huawei. So, and then Samsung and all are leaving their plants in China. Those are being taken over by Chinese corporations. So, you are seeing a huge wave of consolidation going on in the Chinese economy, which is essentially going to end up in increasing the share of the Chinese state in China's GDP. Get the picture?
How much is that, sir? How much is the actual GDP of China?
See, even if we take the nominal GDP to whatever it is, the growth rate has definitely not been. I mean, if I don't know, I haven't actually done any calculations on this front. But I can say one thing: there's a lot of evidence which suggests that the growth rates they have reported in the last 10 years are not what they really are. Okay, and especially in the last 5 years. And
I
when
mean,
you
it's a
have an investment driven model, you can have a simple sort of ICOR kind of framework, which is a very simplistic macroeconomic framework. You have an incremental capital output ratio, you push in so much investment, you got so much output. So the way they maintain their national income account statistics, the way they do things, there's all a lot left to there's a lot to be desired. But the bottom line is they have a huge problem of demand for the reasons I outlined. Their people's wealth is stuck in the real estate sector, which has been on this in bubble territory for a very long time, and Beijing doesn't know what to do about it. It's just trying to keep it a delicate Goldilocks place, but it's anybody's guess whether they'll be able to do it or not. The pandemic has led to a severe decline in employment and therefore demand also. People know what is happening in the real estate sector. These so-called selective defaults are not selective defaults. You can't just say that, oh, Evergrande has defaulted, so what? It's not so what. That's millions of people's money stuck in unfinished projects, and banks which have invested in those projects who are going under. And neither people whose projects are unfinished nor people who lost money in their deposits are being paid back in China. In America, at
wow.
least you have the FDIC.
Yeah.
So you can imagine, people are worried about the future. Jobs are hard to come by. There is no tech nirvana. You see, Japan also had the tech nirvana. Who came up with the Sony Walkman? Who came up with the Sony Discman? Who came up with all those industrial robots in the 80s? Who came up with those extremely potent CNC machine tools? All of it was Japan. Okay, but was it enough to save them from the lost
No.
decades? It can make you very, competitive in a certain industry, but it's not enough for the entire macroeconomy. And it won't just going into these sectors are good. China definitely needs to go into these sectors. But made in China 2025 and made in China standards 2035 are looking a little shaky right now. And that's also because of the tech war. See, they tried to climb the value chain very quickly also. And naturally, the West has responded. So, this is where the state of China is a one trick pony. We in demographic decline, and that demography also in no position to spend, and not willing to spend either, given the
Not
state of affairs.
not willing to
Okay.
spend. I think that is the most important thing
Then,
because
so very good. So the huge overt central government expenditure that Xi Jinping and his cohorts will have to do will now be financed by the savings of the Chinese people, who will park their savings in government securities, and they'll earn a small rate of interest, a low rate of interest from those securities. The Japan
and
model.
what if it goes
Ah,
tail up? That's it.
no, you see, when you have, if there is a country which has its own currency and has borrowed mostly in it, right? It uses its own currency, doesn't have it, and which is allowed to move with, is whatever is a partial float, but not a hard peg to something else. Then you can spend yourself. You can coordinate monetary and fiscal policies to prevent your economy from collapsing completely. But the lost decades have begun. Debt deflation. See, they are going to try to stave off debt deflation. Debt
Yeah.
deflation, unlike just pure deflation, doesn't start from the real markets, not from the goods and services markets. It actually starts from the financial sector because of over indebtedness. Because people then try to get rid of their over indebtedness, that leads to a fall in demand, leads to a fall in more asset prices, which leads to a fall in more demand because of the wealth effect, and leads to a fall in spending also anyway, direct spending. That leads to more default, that leads to more people trying to get rid of over indebtedness. You get the picture. This is the Great Depression basically. Well, there are more channels. There are 4 channels through which this happens. Right. So I just gave an overview of this thing.
I
So
mean, this is fantastic. So when you look at it, because here is a country that boasts about its economic development, its shiny blue cities, and this and that and the other. And I have enough Chinese bots on my uh, channel to actually, give across the kind of stories that you guys are this, we guys are this, and this and that. So next time I'm going to point them out at this particular video and say, "Bhai, please learn the reality of the CCP and how
you
it is
see,
handled."
Chinese cities have been built in the West also. Have the Chinese built anything like the Concorde till now? Japan was building bullet trains in the 1960s, the Zero model.
60s. Yeah.
Yeah. So shiny cities, high speed rail, so on and so forth have been built in the past also. But the problem with all monetary production economies is that they end up in this situation. They end up in debt deflation. In fact, that is the cautionary tale for India also as it is developing. There is no other
Obviously.
model. There is no other model but industrial urbanization. And that invariably ultimately ends up in financialization. When I say financialization, I mean finance, insurance, real estate.
Yeah.
So now come to
Services.
the United States. That this the great, a lot of people go around giving a lot of gas about de-dollarization. It is simply not happening. Okay, because I can give you the latest figures also. If you look at CNY, Chinese yuan, or RMB as a global payments currency, in the last 2 years, it has gone up from 1.9 to 2.54% as a payments currency. Okay. RMB share in reserves is hovering between the 2 to 2.5% mark. Reserves in forex reserves, central bank reserves. The only place where it has made some progress is from 1.79 to 4.49% in the trade finance market, and that is entirely due to the war in Ukraine. Okay, and the sanctions on Russia, and the Russians moving out of the dollar. But
Dollar.
that is not going to lead to, the RMB becoming another reserve currency, because still the RMB it becomes fully convertible on the capital account. Nobody is going to put their money in China, and you're beginning to see that. You've seen the quarterly decline, huge decline in foreign direct
FDI.
investment into China, right? Major fall has happened, a massive fall has happened. If it goes on for a few more quarters, you'll end up seeing a capital reversal in China, along with all the other outflows that are happening. Capital flow reversal on the, on the balance of, in the balance of what do you in the balance of payment, on the capital side of the balance of payments. You see, all these people, Huarong, etc., who've collapsed, their foreign lenders were the first to pull out, by the way. Their
Acha.
foreign lenders were the first to pull out. They have a lot of dollar loans as well. So and people are talking about surpluses. Surpluses also may become a thing of the past. You will not see maybe capital account surpluses in China that much. And even the current account, it's entirely contingent on how much of their excess savings can they export abroad.
Well, a lot of people say they've got some $3 trillion
That
in
savings
cash
may,
reserves.
yeah, $3 trillion in reserves. By the way, they had 4.41 trillion in reserves in 2014, which was their peak. But when the big capital outflow crisis happened in 2015-16, they had to burn through about 1 trillion of that to keep the RMB in the, in the trading band that they maintain, that the PBOC maintains. Suddenly you will find it's not that adequate also. So the thing is, now somebody will say, okay, so the RMB will enter a period of weakness because the
Hmm.
central government will have to step in, and the PBOC will help the central government by monetary easing also. There'll be coordinated monetary and fiscal policy, because if the PBOC lowers interest rates, the entire term structure of interest rate, the entire, the yield curve they'll try to bring the yield curve down, both via reducing benchmark rates as well as directly pushing down the yield curve, which is what you mean by printing money, by the way, quantitative
Printing
easing,
money.
where you try to print. It's actually not printing money, as I keep saying again and again. It's an accretion of commercial bank reserves. It's not, money that is being printed and being pushed out into the goods market or something. That is not what is being done. So anyway, so you try to push down you try to flatten the yield curve. China is also doing that. It has also begun QE through other means. Those are not the same kind of large-scale asset program purchases, LSAPs that you're seeing in America by the Federal Reserve. I go into some detail in that in my book about what it is doing it is also using balance sheet policies. See, what you call printing money is basically what is called a balance sheet policy in the realm of monetary economics. So my book has details on that, on how that works and doesn't, and how they don't work.
So,
So that is where we are at right now. And America obviously has done that for ever since the GFC. They did that once before during the Great Depression, by the way. The
29.
oldest instance of QE is in the Great Depression, probably. And then the next one happened with the case of Japan in the 1990s, the Bank of
Hmm.
Japan. And of course, the Bank of Japan is considered a pioneer with QQEYCC, qualitative and quantitative easing with yield curve control.
Oof.
They would hold down yields at a particular point on benchmark government securities. All sorts of stuff have been done.
But Japanese have an
So
advantage of technology, so that's something which is,
yeah. So the Chinese have also been trying to get that advantage to hold them, but ultimately the advantage of technology is with the United States of America. You're talking about the
trying.
techno dollar. When
Bottom
you
line is
talk about,
trying.
when you talk about the East Asian supply chain, America is present as a ubiquitous ghost over there, because the IP of many important things, components, processes, software is with America. And you've seen the way they have sanctioned China on the semiconductor front. You can see how far they reached is in the
Yeah, yeah.
entire semiconductor value chain, right?
Sir, talking about
So
America, one of the things that we see in America is, of course, this whole narrative of de-dollarization, which is there. I mean, I look at it, de-dollarization probably would be the reduction of usage of dollar in bilateral trade by certain countries, which is what we are trying to do. So you can call that technically de-dollarization. But the whole, thing that, oh, sab khatam ho jayega, USA bhag jayega, wo samet ke baith jayega, he will just go into his hole and sit down there and, this and that.
that betrays a certain kind of wishful thinking on the part of some people. You see, when you talk about a reserve currency, what are you talking about?
Hmm.
What are you talking about when you talk about reserve currency? Whether it is used as a unit of exchange or not for international
Correct.
payments, whether you sorry, not a unit of exchange, a unit of account. Whether oil is priced in dollars or not, or whether it's priced in RMB as a medium of exchange for settling payments, for transaction settlement, and also as a store of value for central banks, as a reserve currency. True reserve currency status is when it is seen as a store of value. Now, a China, which is actually in a much worse deleveraging dilemma than the United States is, has a much smaller consumer economy in nominal terms. The largest consumer economy continues to be the United States. Okay, let's not forget this. China is a much smaller consumer economy. Somebody will talk about purchasing power parity, etc. PPP does not work for traded goods. This is what people need to understand. PPP works for only domestically produced goods and services when you do PPP based accounting. When you're talking about traded goods and commodities, then you have to look at the nominal size of the market. Get the picture?
Okay.
I'll
This.
explain this in greater detail. Okay. So whatever, but the thing is that the largest consumer market continues to be the United States of America. The real, although the what do you call that? The Johns Hopkins, JHUAPL, and all those people came out with reports about where China might be leading in which technology fronts. But the two areas where America leads is absolutely the world leader is semiconductor technology and jet engine technology. Okay.
Correct.
These are the two things that really matter, by the way, in this world. These two things. Of course, other things also matter, like being able to produce a compact nuclear reactor for your nuclear attack submarine. Right? China has still not been able to do that, by the way. Only the Russians and the Americans, and of course the British and the French, managed to do that. So anyway, that's another different topic altogether. But you'll see in the naval buildup that China is undertaking, you're seeing a lot of surface ships. You've seen a lot of diesel submarines, some with AIP also. But you are
Hmm.
not seeing the kind of nuclear submarine buildup that you would expect, because running a large naval nuclear enterprise is not easy. So here, I would say even Russia is ahead of the Chinese, despite their huge nuclear buildup, civil nuclear buildup. Anyway, so whatever be the case, now the thing is that uh, you have the United States of America, which is entrenched. The pound persisted as the world's reserve currency for 3 decades, even after the United States has surpassed the British economy comfortably. And here, the Chinese economy is not even going to surpass the US economy in dollar terms, in nominal
Right.
GDP, in current dollars. Because, because their only game left now is to let the yuan depreciate. Okay. Try to tap export markets again just to keep certain sectors afloat, although that's going to be very difficult now. So what is going to end up happening is that excess saving in the Chinese economy is going to just go towards financing. Excess private saving is just going to go towards financing excess government expenditure now. Direct government expenditure by the central government to bail out this, bail out that, and give rounds of poke barrel stimulus. Remember that thing I told you? G minus S plus G minus T plus I minus S plus X minus
Yes.
M. Okay. Now, if I minus S is highly positive, okay, though either G minus T or X minus M will have to be negative. So either they have to get the picture. If net savings are so much in excess of investment, because investment can't happen now in the Chinese economy without their creating an even bigger bubble at the same rate, then what is left? Either of those have to turn negative. And the one that will turn negative for in China's case will be G minus T very soon. Well, even more negative, that is, even more negative, to eat up the excess savings in the economy.
Sheesh. I mean,
See, the excess over consumption that you have, the savings that you have, it has to go somewhere in the economy. Either
right.
it has to be balanced out exactly by investment, which is what most short term macroeconomic models show, that I equal to S. This is what we learn in undergrad economics, and etc. Or it has to lead to X minus M in an open economy. You export it abroad because you produce so many cars in excess of what your people are going to buy, and your government is also going to buy. Okay, and your industry is going to buy. See, when a company buys a car, it becomes investment. When an individual buys a car, it becomes consumption in the national
Consumption and
income
life.
accounting
Yeah.
statistics.
Hmm.
Okay, so where it has to go somewhere, then it has to be exported. But if the government starts chomping up your excess savings, which are parked as financial savings in the banking sector, or which you then start using to buy government securities, that's where you'll head. That's where your extra savings will be sent. This is how it'll end up looking. If X
My
minus
God.
M cannot be boosted, this is how it'll end up looking.
Yeah, of course, of course. But sir, do you think the American economy is? I mean, I would actually we will probably do a little more detailed discussion on the American economy in the next show. But I want to ask you, sir, the they've given themselves a lot of self-inflicted wounds.
Well, they
There were no,
have, but they are still the incumbents. 58% of reserves are very much
yeah,
in dollar
still
terms, and
yes.
that has not changed. India doesn't see any value in China. India is hitching its ride to America. We already hold 220 plus billion US dollars. China is at, I think, 800 or so right now. They are trying to
Yeah.
reduce their dollar holdings. So as we grow and we get more access to the US market, we'll start increasing dollar holdings. And see, around 30% of US debt is owed to foreigners. Okay, 30%.
Hmm.
70% is owed domestically only. And a
So
lot
they
of that
can
70% is owned between various branches of the government also, including, if I include the Federal Reserve as a branch of government, the
so
central
they can
bank, that is.
repurpose a whole lot from there.
They can repurpose a whole lot. See, don't forget one thing. US debt is a major collateral for transactions across the world. Public
Correct.
debt and private debt are not the same thing. You need public debt in an economy anyway, in a modern financial economy, to serve as the bedrock of collateral on the basis of which you will build so many financial transactions. Otherwise, what will you give as collateral? Gold. You want a you want to do something. So you will use government securities only.
You just spoke like the whole narrative which is going on now. So one brick is equal to 1 kg of gold and all that stuff. I was like, okay, you know, if current making a currency was that simple, I'm not an economist, but I know one thing: making a currency cannot be that simple.
Why do we say any currency, say the rupee or the dollar or the yuan, ultimately where does it derive its value power from? And this is something that the modern monetary theorists are correct in pointing out. This has been pointed out in the past also by others,
Hmm.
by other schools of economic thought. The power derives from the fact that you can pay taxes in that currency. Okay, if you want to pay taxes in India, you will have to pay it in INR only.
INR only.
Get the picture? You can't even pay it in this or that. And the second thing is, any central bank which is issuing a currency, a fiat currency, cannot have private alternatives which bear the same level of risk as that fiat currency, which is close to zero because it is a fiat currency. Otherwise, monetary policy will not, you cannot implement monetary policy. Which is why this notion that Bitcoins and crypto and this,
I was
what has
just about to
happened?
ask you that.
Huge, so massive attack has been undertaken on all these private forms of money,
Yeah,
and they've
yeah,
all
yeah.
been, so the only ones that will remain will be what are called stable coins, okay, which are themselves benchmarked to some public fiat money.
So what's the
Only
point then?
those cryptocurrency forms will exist ultimately, which are themselves benchmarked to some form of some fiat money, some fiat currency. That's called a
So
stable coin.
what's the big fuss then, sir?
Big fuss is nothing. There are a lot of people on YouTube and social media, other forms of social media and elsewhere, who want to hype this to make their own money. Nothing else. Okay, so they are constantly trying to influence people that this is a great idea. After Elon Musk took over Twitter, the whole place is flooded, basically flooded with cryptocurrency specialists, right? So this is an entire anarcho-capitalism. This is also a thing of the world.
I, I'm
And
gonna
by
ask
the
you
way, but
one.
once the central bank digital currencies become much more, once they are properly rolled out everywhere, even the stable coins will find it difficult.
Difficult because the trust factor.
I'll give you an example. When you look at the numbers in your commercial bank account, okay, say you have 10 lakh rupees over there. Do you really have 10 lakh rupees?
No, because the bank
That
spends
is
it
a
and
that is a ledger balance, okay?
yeah,
That is a ledger balance, which is the liability of the commercial bank.
to provide it
It
for
is
you whenever
not,
you need it.
yeah. And if the bank goes under, you might not get it either. Only
And how
the
does the
one good move was that 5 lakhs, up to 5 lakhs, you're insured now by the government. Okay.
ah
So de facto, you can say out of that 10 lakhs, maybe 5 lakhs is basically actual INR. You can say that at some level, but not really. In the case of central bank digital currency, when on one of your payment systems, you'll see that given to you, against that given to you, that is actual money. Okay, that is actual money backed by the government, backed by a promise of the central bank. That is a
hmm.
liability of the central bank. That is not a liability of the commercial banking sector. What do you see in a note? I promise to pay the bearer a sum of so and
Better
so
the
rupees
sum
signed
of
by the
yeah,
RBI
yeah.
governor. That. So that is a riskless proposition, so to speak. Get the picture? When
Absolutely,
those
sir.
things come in, I'll do an entire. Talking in very lay terms
No,
and
no, no.
general
This is
terms
this is a
here.
great baseline, sir. What we've done today, I think we've laid out a very good baseline to understand the economics of this China thing, which everybody's kind of harping about. By China will come and buy off the world and stuff like that,
No,
and
no,
plus
they
the whole
tried that. Japan also tried that in the 80s. Then they
yeah,
ran
it
out of
doesn't
money,
work. It
and now
doesn't work.
China has run out of money also, which is why
Yeah,
all the BRI projects are dwindling now. And this China as a net exporter of capital story is also now going into a, yeah, it'll be a net exporter of capital with huge capital outflows, unmanaged capital outflows.
and
That's
a
how it'll
huge
be a
debt to back it.
That's how it'll be. You see, what happens is when they say that currency decline, oh, my exports will go up. Not immediately. Most of the exports are valued in dollars. Okay. So
Dollars.
you don't immediately get the benefit of a currency decline. You get that later through the supply chain. When you can push
That's
down
only if you
prices,
want
you're
to.
invoicing. Ah,
Yeah, you can decline it if you want to collect your currency, like exactly what the Russians are trying to do right now.
and
But the
yeah,
Chinese have no
because
dearth of
because
it.
they balance their budget in a particular way, na.
Yeah.
They used to balance their budget in a particular way. That's another story. How Saudi Arabia balances its budget,
Oh yeah,
Russia,
yeah, yeah.
so on and so forth.
We
Okay,
learn about that.
so
So because I
so
recently
that
was told about Russia, I was like, what the hell is this? I mean, I thought this was a plain and simple world. It is all teda
no,
meda.
no, no. These are so there are network effects that favor incumbents. Network effects are in favor of the dollar. China tried to
So
overcome those network effects by creating more You see, by creating as many webs as it could, right, with BRI and its position as the world's largest trading economy and all that. But that, as the largest trader in the world, but it was not enough. You see, it's like this. It went, suppose it goes to Kyrgyzstan and says that, oh, I'll give you a loan. Take a 4 billion RMB loan. The Kyrgyz government says, oh, I'll take this loan later. You give me a $800 million loan. Get the picture? Just like the Russians, what are they doing with our rupees? Are they being able to do anything with that? Our own capital account is not convertible. Nobody wants to invest in rupee denominated assets just like that. So they are not finding people they can palm off these rupees to. Only thing they can do is they can buy a lot of things from us.
Which is now
So
starting to show a little bit of this thing rise. Yeah,
yeah, but it's not commensurate to the level of oil
levels.
purchases we made from
It's the
them,
same
right?
thing with us. We don't want to hoard a lot of rubles as well. So I guess
Yeah.
that's
So, and the other problem is
interesting.
why is rupee ruble trading not working? Trade not working because there's just not enough trade to find a
Yeah.
reference rate, rupee to ruble. How will you find a reference rate? I went into some detail in this book also, by the way. Although, and this
Hmm.
was written much earlier, before that part was written before this whole war in Ukraine started in some ways. Where's the reference rate? It's these are all easy things to say, but they don't quite happen the way people think they'll
Yeah,
happen.
yeah. I guess people got triggered by the factor that you had to pay certain amounts in yuan and stuff like that. So we got triggered in this and that. I mean,
Yeah, so
I don't.
if the Russians see when the in 1893 when the Franco-Russian détente happened, okay, after feuding for most of the 19th century,
Yeah,
the Russians started holding a lot of francs in their reserves. Okay, this was the famous French Franco-Russian détente. This is 1893. Something like that has happened between Russia and China also right now. So, but it's not. It's see, they're getting a lot of things from China actually. A lot
but
of
they
these
won't. They won't
semiconductors,
keep
they're
it.
all are
They
coming
won't.
from China right now.
They won't keep the yuan there for a long time. They'll probably shelve it off.
They will, but the point is, how many people are willing to accept the yuan either? See, you
That's
can make much more progress on the trade settlement, but even there, the progress will get checked ultimately because of a lack of being able to create a proper reference range rate.
that's what the
So
BRICS chairman said, that yuan is a great trading currency, but it's not a good saving currency.
no, no, it's not. And now it's going to lose value against the dollar. Who will want to put money in that? Because they'll have to
Fantastic.
do
That's
both
going to be
monetary
interesting.
and fiscal easing as their lost decades begin. So they are not in any great shape at all. And they are, and because America's techno war is going to ensure they can't climb the commanding heights of certain sectors that they wanted to. They
I don't
wanted to
know, sir,
climb the
because
commanding heights of and become dominant. Certain sectors they're already dominant right now, but even that dominance will get eroded now because
they,
of
they
the
talk about they
French
talk
shoring,
about catching
reshoring
up
that
with
is going on.
America, but a lot of experts, and I'm sure I'd bug you for this answer, is sometime in the future, is the actual rate of the actual size of their economy. I was watching something where this person calculated it out, and there's a couple of articles also there online. It to about $8 to $9 trillion is what he said. Now, when you're talking about 300% debt to GDP, if it's 8 to 9, I don't know what's that, 500-600%. I'm not sure. It's
Well, their
it's maddening.
leverage is very high, and their so-called see what have they tried? This Xi Jinping tried all these deleveraging campaigns from
Yeah,
2017. Initially, they pushed the corporate debt to GDP ratio to around 160% from 165. But then they had to change course, tack. Even before the pandemic, they started changing tack. And then they started the three red lines policy, where they looked at debt to asset ratios and this what do you call that? I remember that. 1 second. They looked at three things for lending to the real estate sector. Right? They looked at three metrics, three debt ratios they looked at, and they tried to control those as well, and it didn't work. Then they, and now you'll find in January 2023 itself, they have started saying, no, no, we are going to get rid of that policy. Actually, they tried to get rid of that policy once in 2021 also. It's called the three red lines policy, where they tried to control, basically where they tried to direct lending in their economy. The bottom line is real estate is the only game in town, and it is it is now what it is. I already outlined. It is
It's
already
like,
well past its sell by date.
yeah, it's like you have a cow and you sold it three times.
Yeah,
You
you
know.
have a declining
So,
population which does not have a large enough share of GDP, and which now does not want to spend either that much because of the future it sees ahead for itself. How are you going to do all this so-called dual circulation, which is just another name for rebalancing, basically?
yeah, yeah.
Okay, it's just not happening. They are in a very bad state. They have hit Japan's problem at a much lower level of nominal GDP, nominal per capita GDP. Japan had attained 80% of America's nominal per capita GDP at that time, when they
Then it
went
blew up.
into
Yeah.
the when Endaka Fukio destroyed them and they went into the lost decade. These guys are at around 12,000 to 14,000, whichever you calculate it. They are at about 1/6.
This.
So you are going to see a China where they are close to deflation almost all the time. Their
So
factory gate prices collapsed by 4.41%, by the way. Their consumer price inflation rate declined by 0.3%. So inflation rate of minus 0.3% CPI. But their producer price index that fell by over 4%. So factory gate
yikes.
prices are collapsing.
Factory production is gone. That means
Yeah, yeah, but they're still producing. Have a nice day. They'll all show up in inventories. See, a lot of the problem. I
they
told you,
load them up.
they produce over 1 billion tons of steel, and we
And
produce
do what with
120
it?
million plus. Ah. Now you know why they can build so many ships so quickly and
No,
so
but
many roads so quickly.
that's fine, sir. They're building the ship, but the damn ships are getting cracks in it. So their steel is also not that good.
No, no,
So,
China is a world superpower. China has a bigger maritime economy than America. Its shipbuilding is so much larger than America's, etc., etc. So it already has the commanding heights, apparently. It will turn out that that is not the case. At one time, the Soviet Union built 300 nuclear submarines.
yeah,
The Amur shipbuilding shipbuilding yard used to produce nuclear submarine almost every other month.
every year. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, well,
yeah, yeah,
I'm saying in a manner of speaking, but they
yeah,
built
yeah.
around 300 over 300 nuclear subs, right? So if you look at the peak Soviet Navy, that's a
Yeah, it was
huge
huge,
nuclear
humongous.
force.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
so man, that's just a
But so the
joke, but
Soviet stuff
whatever.
was still
Yeah.
quality. It was hard. It was rugged. These guys are building brittle. You know, I don't know what. You look at the
But I
videos
can
that
say
coming
one
out of
thing:
there.
anybody who builds things to this extent ultimately wants to use them. Okay, nobody undertakes such a huge build-up just for
Show.
economic or general posturing, right? So they
That's true,
want to
sir.
use it.
I hope their
And
Coast
given,
Guard ships that they've built up can be of some use.
yeah, but they have the white fleet, they have the gray fleet,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
they
yeah, yeah.
have
Then the
the
militia. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, 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 exactly. So they have all
I think
sorts of
they
things.
weaponized 100,000 boats from the militia.
And
The
just
small
imagine,
boats,
I'm
hundred
sure
thousand
they're going to be
guns.
able to deploy. If the Russians can deploy so many Lancet drones, then the
Yeah.
Chinese can deploy several multiples of that using their
Hmm.
industrial setup. So the play for them would be when you increasingly find you're not really going to be able to compete economically the way you wanted to, things may shift to military competition.
Military competition.
And that is true for both the United States and China at the moment.
Well,
So
United States,
there's
we know what they're doing in Europe and stuff like that. But see the deal, the difference between the United States and I'll probably sound very nasty, but United States understands how to contain a certain war. They'll play games. They'll do this. They'll do that. But the war doesn't expand. It just stays in that geolocationary area. They made a mistake in Syria, Iraq, and all that stuff. But generally speaking, there's so many wars that they fought. Outcomes apart, they've been able to kind of hold it in place and, you know, control it to a certain extent. I
Yeah,
wonder
but
if the Chinese have that
the
capability.
nuclear backstop also ensures that, right? That you keep
Yeah,
conflicts limited in time and space. But the Chinese are definitely going to try to do something with all that they have built. It's not like they're going to let it rust forever or just let it go into, because there are differences between them and Japan. First of all, Japan did not have a commensurate military buildup, although
correct.
in some, and it was very much part of the US alliance system, right? In the cold during the Cold War, Japan did have a very large navy. They had almost 100 maritime patrol aircraft because they were part of, they were ASW, anti submarine warfare was their forte during the Cold War, right? They also built a large AVAX fleet. That is when you had, just in the 90s, you had Tom Clancy writing that novel called Debt of Honor, where he talks
Ah,
about the Japanese building an ICBM using an old, SS-18 and SS-18, or was it an SS-9 stiletto? Anyway, so they used basically, may have been an SS-19 also. I think they took
19.
SS-19 models,
I think 19,
probably.
sir.
Anyway,
Hmm.
so they took SS-19 models and then they upgraded them, and then they acquired a nuclear capability very quickly, and they made an alliance with Japan and China, India, to take on the United States in the Indo-Pacific. Unfortunately for China, India and Japan have made an alliance with America to take on China in the Indo-Pacific. But
It's the
China
opposite.
is different. But China is different from Japan in the sense that it is much bigger. Okay, its structural position in the world economy is superior to that of Japan's than Japan's was in the 1980s when the same thing was done to Japan. And it has been a nuclear power for decades, and it has undergone a huge military buildup. And it also has a massive intelligence setup which has infiltrated all walks of
Everywhere.
life in many
Yeah,
places.
yeah, 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 yeah. Everywhere, everywhere. So this
I
has
can
been an
see it
eye opener.
even, yeah, I can even
Sorry,
see it
you're
on,
saying?
you can see it on social media and everything.
Oh yeah, oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and
They've infiltrated everywhere, sir.
so
Everywhere.
academia, just like the old Soviet Union in this
Oh,
sense.
trust you me, when I put this video out, you'll see the Chinese there. So they're there, and I
So
mean
the so the
they'll argue
question
about
is,
everything.
which way will they go? Will they try a stunt along the Himalayas, or whether they will try that stunt across the strait, Taiwan Strait? Because see, one thing is there. They have spent a disproportionate amount of resources in building up their navy, right? Not using that navy seems very strange. It cannot only be for protecting their sea lines of
Man,
communications and maintaining a global trading empire. In
it
that, in
doesn't
any
go
case, will
to
not
the globe.
happen.
Yeah,
Okay,
it doesn't.
that
Yeah,
in any case is now in jeopardy. So then it must be designed for a single purpose. Now, if you remember that memo that got leaked by that American brass. I think he was a 3 star or a 4 star. Mike Minihan. Remember? He said we
yeah.
have a gut feeling we'll fight in 2025.
27, 25, 27,
25. No, he
25. Yeah.
said everybody's saying 2027, but he says my gut tells me we will fight in 2025. So, and by the way, do you know maritime insurance rates right now between mainland China and Taiwan are the same as that between mainland China and Japan, and mainland China and more far off places. So the maritime insurance sector is also starting to price in what could happen. If you see a bigger spike there, you can be certain that they are hearing things.
Yeah, yeah. There's been a fantastic talk, so let me assure you, people are going to love it with the insight and stuff like that. We should make this. I've been after your life, and I'm going to be after your life. Let's make this a regular podcast, at least once or twice a month, where we can sit down and talk about the world economy, what's happening, what do we see, uh, you know and of course the next one that I want us to do should be about India, where what have we done in India in the past few years, what opportunities do we have, and how do we kind of go forward is something that I'm sure the audience would love to hear. uh, the India China contest is not going to get over, and it's a all out battle. It's economics, it's military. I think it's going to go more towards the economics rather than the military sort of this thing, because the Chinese will try and cool this place off a little bit, so that, as you said, and I think I buy your argument that if they've built up that large a navy, the target seems to be towards the oceans rather than the land. That doesn't mean that we should be complacent, but of course, a deduction can be made out. So thanks so much, sir. This has been a fantastic show. I think I've it's reminded me of a whole lot of basic economics that one actually loses through the rhetoric and the whole propaganda that is flying around the place, which we've spoken about it offline. But then it's also true to give the right picture. De-dollarization, to the so-called BRICS currency, which is supposedly just coming out in the next 1 week, and none of us have even heard about it. So it's an interesting paradigm, and thank you for clarifying all that. And I hope I see you very soon for this India episode. Till then, sir.
Yeah, yeah, good night. And just I'll say one thing: people have to be a little rational. If you see your prime minister going to the United States and making, and a lot is made out of it by both sides about the signing of a license production deal for jet engines, or for certain investments, or even for buying 31 drones off the shelf. You have to understand where the alignment is. India does not really play both sides. The tilt is towards the West because of the economic factors that are very much important for India. But India has not let go of Russia. That's a separate issue altogether.
It's called hedging your
Which,
bet, sir. Come on. I mean,
yeah, no, with
you
China
hedge.
we are not. Things like BRICS currency will not happen is because we are not going to shore up China.
Yeah.
China we are
Why
going to
should we?
try and de-link with.
Yeah. Why should
See,
we,
we are
sir?
stopping their investments. We are stopping their large scale investments in India now.
As a matter of fact, I did a live show on this. I'm not an economist, but my logic really told me that why should I support BRICS? It doesn't make sense. Yeah, as long as it suits my purpose should be to show China down and keep playing these geopolitical games with him. Use the summit and keep at it, because clearly it's getting him frustrated. So continue at it. It doesn't really
See,
make much of a difference.
two things are there. We are being clever here also. We are letting Chinese medium and small scale enterprises come into India. Okay. Because they will be part of the supply chain, but we are not letting a BYD come in.
The
And
big
another thing
boys.
that you have to note is we now have an ideology, or we have a philosophy that we need to shape organizations from within. So being in the BRICS and the SCO also prevents us from getting blindsided. Get the
Absolutely.
picture?
Absolutely.
So
That's what I'm saying, sir. You can fight China only being with China. You can't fight China being away from China. It doesn't make sense. So I actually did a nice hour long live today, and I'm so glad that you mentioned the same thing. It really, something up here does work a little bit. I'd like to say that, because I argued for the fact that why would I want to support the BRICS currency? It doesn't make sense. And secondly, a currency will only come into place when there are complementing trade policies, internal policies, this, that, all that stuff is the same, like the EU for that matter. Here, there's nothing. Thanks so much,
uh,
sir, for this wonderful talk, and I think it's a nice flowing conversation that we've had, and I'm looking forward to many more in the future. Till then, sir, Jai Hind.
I'm really glad you had me, Adi. Thank you. Jai Hind to you as well.